The shot rang out across the dusty main street of Redemption Springs, causing everyone to freeze in place like figures in a daguerreotype. Aurora Reed stood trembling between the two men, her uncle's meaty hand gripping her arm with bruising force, and across from them, Wyatt Evans, his revolver drawn and steady, his blue eyes blazing with righteous fury beneath the brim of his weathered Stetson. "I said, take your hands off her," Wyatt repeated, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a man who wouldn't say it a third time. "She ain't property. Not yours. Not anyone's." It was 1876 in the Arizona Territory, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business or thought they did. Aurora's uncle, Bernard Reed, a man whose very shadow seemed to reek of whiskey and meanness, tightened his grip. "This don't concern you, cowboy. She's my brother's girl. Law says I'm her guardian till she's wed, and I aim to collect what's owed me for the trouble." Aurora winced as his fingers dug deeper. At 22, she'd spent the last 3 years since her parents' deaths living under her uncle's thumb, enduring his cruelty while he squandered what little inheritance should have been hers. "The law says no such thing about a grown woman," Wyatt countered, taking a step closer. "And the only thing you're owed is a swift kick from here to Sunday." Aurora had known Wyatt Evans for precisely 2 weeks. He'd ridden into town with a small cattle drive, quiet and watchful, taking a job at the Peterson Ranch outside town. They'd exchanged glances at the general store, shared conversation at the church social, and yesterday, he'd asked permission to call on her properly. Her uncle had seemed agreeable until this morning when he announced he'd arranged her marriage to Jacob Miller, the aging owner of the saloon who'd offered to forgive Bernard's considerable gambling debts in exchange for Aurora's hand. "Mr. Evans," Aurora said, her voice steadier than she felt, "please don't get yourself killed on my account." Wyatt's eyes never left Bernard's face. "Miss Reed, I've faced worse than drunken bullies who hide behind the law to mistreat ladies." A small crowd had gathered now, maintaining a safe distance but hungry for the drama unfolding. Sheriff Taylor pushed through, his hand resting on his own holstered gun. "What in tarnation is going on here?" the lawman demanded. Bernard Reed was quick to answer. "This drifter's threatening me over family business, Sheriff. My niece is being willful, and I'm simply exercising my authority." The sheriff looked between them, his weathered face revealing little. "That true, Evans?" Wyatt lowered his gun slightly, but didn't holster it. "Sheriff, this man is trying to force Miss Reed to marry against her will. She's of age. He has no right. She's living under my roof, eating my food," Bernard spat. "She'll do as I say or find herself on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back." Aurora pulled against her uncle's grip. "I'd prefer the street to being sold to pay your debts." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That true, Reed? You selling your niece to Miller?" Bernard's face flushed dark with anger. "It's a proper marriage arrangement. Been done that way since time began." Sheriff Taylor rubbed his mustache. "Miss Reed, you're what, 22 now?" "Yes, sir," she answered, chin raised despite her fear. "Then seems to me you're free to make your own choice in this matter." The sheriff turned to Bernard. "You let go of her now, Reed. She wants to stay with you, that's her choice. She wants to leave, that's also her right." Bernard's grip tightened one final time before he shoved Aurora away from him. She stumbled forward, and Wyatt stepped quickly to steady her, one hand catching her elbow while the other kept his gun trained on Bernard. "This ain't over," Bernard growled. "You got nowhere to go, girl. And you," he pointed at Wyatt, "you're making an enemy you can't afford." "I'll take my chances," Wyatt replied evenly. Sheriff Taylor stepped between them. "Reed, go sleep it off. Evans, holster that weapon before I decide this is more trouble than it's worth." Wyatt complied slowly, but his eyes never left Bernard until the older man turned and stalked toward the saloon, shouldering roughly past the spectators. The sheriff turned to Aurora. "Miss Reed, you got somewhere you can stay tonight?" Aurora hesitated. She'd made few close friends in town, many keeping their distance due to Bernard's reputation. I'm not certain, Sheriff. She can stay at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house," Wyatt said. "I'll pay for a room." Aurora's eyes widened. "Mr. Evans, I couldn't possibly, just until you sort things out," he added quickly. "Mrs. Holloway runs a respectable establishment. Your reputation will be safe there." Sheriff Taylor nodded. That seems a reasonable solution for now. I'll walk you both over there. He gave Wyatt a pointed look. And then you and I can have a conversation about drawing weapons on Main Street, Evans. As they walked toward the boarding house, Aurora found her voice. Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. Wyatt's eyes remained focused ahead, but his voice softened. My mother was forced to marry a man who made her life miserable. I swore I'd never stand by and watch that happen to another woman if I could help it. He glanced at her then. Besides, in 2 weeks I've learned you're kind to children. You help Mrs. Peterson with her garden though it's not your job, and you have the finest smile I've seen in all my travels. Aurora felt a blush creep up her neck despite the gravity of her situation. You've been watching me? A faint smile crossed his face. Hard not to. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a tidy 2-story structure with lace curtains and a wrap-around porch. The widow herself answered the door, taking in the situation with shrewd eyes as the sheriff explained. Of course the poor dear can stay, she said, ushering Aurora inside. I've had my fill of Bernard Reed's nonsense over the years. She fixed Wyatt with a stern look. And you, young man, can call on Miss Reed during proper visiting hours only. Yes, madam, Wyatt agreed solemnly. As Aurora followed Mrs. Holloway inside, she turned back to see Wyatt watching her, concern etched across his tanned face. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest hope. The following morning, Aurora rose early, having slept fitfully despite the clean, comfortable room. She dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, grateful at least that Mrs. Holloway had provided a brush for her hair and basic toiletries. Downstairs, she found the landlady preparing breakfast for her handful of boarders, 2 traveling salesmen, and an elderly schoolteacher. There you are, dear, Mrs. Holloway said warmly. Come have some breakfast. We need to figure out what's next for you. Aurora sat at the table, accepting a cup of coffee with gratitude. I need to retrieve my belongings from my uncle's house. Mrs. Holloway frowned. I wouldn't go alone. Your uncle has quite the temper when he's been drinking. I'll ask the sheriff to accompany me. Aurora decided, though the thought of facing Bernard again made her stomach clench. Before she could finish her breakfast, there was a knock at the front door. Mrs. Holloway answered it and returned with Wyatt Evans in tow, hat in hand. Mr. Evans has come to call, she announced with a knowing smile. I told him it's scandalously early, but given the circumstances. Wyatt looked uncomfortable but determined. Miss Reed, I've spoken with Sheriff Taylor. He's agreed to accompany us to your uncle's house to collect your things. Aurora set down her coffee cup. Us. If you'll permit me, he added hastily. The sheriff suggested an extra pair of hands might be useful. An hour later, Aurora stood in the bedroom that had been hers for 3 years, quickly gathering her modest possessions while Sheriff Taylor stood guard in the hallway. Her uncle had been mercifully absent, though the sheriff warned he might return at any moment. Wyatt helped carry her trunk, which contained 2 dresses, some undergarments, a shawl, and the few keepsakes she had from her parents, her mother's Bible, her father's pocket watch, and a small daguerreotype of the 3 of them taken when Aurora was 16. Is this everything? Wyatt asked, surveying the small collection. Aurora nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. My uncle sold most of my parents' belongings after they died. Said it was to pay debts, but the money never seemed to cover them, Wyatt finished, understanding in his eyes. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Holloway helped Aurora settle in, clucking sympathetically over the meager contents of her trunk. We'll need to find you some employment, dear. The room is paid for a week, but after that, I can sew, Aurora offered, and I'm good with numbers. My father taught me bookkeeping for his store before he died. Mrs. Peterson mentioned the general store needs help, Wyatt said from the doorway. I could speak to Mr. Peterson if you'd like. Aurora felt a rush of gratitude. That would be very kind, Mr. Evans. Wyatt shifted his weight, seeming suddenly shy. Miss Reed, I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tonight? At the hotel restaurant. He rushed on before she could answer. Mrs. Holloway could chaperone, of course. I just thought you might like a proper meal after everything that's happened. Mrs. Holloway beamed. What a lovely idea. I'd be delighted to accompany you both. Aurora found herself agreeing, surprising herself with how much she looked forward to it despite the upheaval in her life. That evening, dressed in her best gown, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, Aurora felt almost normal as she sat across from Wyatt at a corner table in the hotel's small restaurant. Mrs. Holloway sat a discreet distance away, close enough to observe, but far enough to allow conversation. "Mr. Peterson has agreed to hire you," Wyatt informed her over roast beef and potatoes. "You can start tomorrow if you'd like." Aurora's eyes widened. "So quickly? Did you tell him about my situation?" "Only that you were seeking employment and had experience with storekeeping," Wyatt assured her. "Your circumstances are your own to share or keep private as you wish." She studied him in the lamplight, this man who had so suddenly become her champion. He was handsome, certainly, with his strong jaw and thoughtful eyes, but it was his quiet dignity that drew her most. "Why are you helping me this way, Mr. Evans?" "Truly." Wyatt set down his fork, considering his words carefully. "When I came to Redemption Springs, I wasn't planning to stay long. Just enough time to earn money for the next stretch of trail." He met her gaze directly. "Then I saw you reading to those children outside the church, and something changed." Aurora remembered that day she'd volunteered to mind the little ones during a church meeting. "Changed how?" "I started thinking maybe I'd been drifting long enough." His eyes held hers. "Miss Reed, Aurora, I know we've only just met, but I feel as if I've known you much longer. There's a goodness in you that's rare in this world." Before Aurora could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Bernard Reed stood swaying in the doorway, his face flushed with drink and rage. "There you are," he slurred, pointing at Aurora. "Playing the fine lady while you shame your family name." Wyatt stood slowly, positioning himself between Aurora and her approaching uncle. "Mr. Reed, this isn't the place." Bernard sneered. "Ain't you the gallant one? Think I don't know what you're after? Same thing Miller wants. Only he was willing to pay for it." Several diners gasped. Mrs. Holloway hurried to Aurora's side as Wyatt's expression hardened. "You need to leave," Wyatt said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Bernard lurched forward. "She's coming with me. I already told Miller the wedding's still on. He's expecting his bride Sunday next." Aurora rose to her feet, trembling but determined. "I am not yours to give or sell, Uncle Bernard. I never was." "You ungrateful little—" Bernard lunged toward her, but Wyatt intercepted him, shoving him back. Two hotel staff members quickly approached. "Sir, you need to leave the premises," one said firmly to Bernard. "This ain't over," Bernard spat as they escorted him out. "Not by a long shot." The restaurant buzzed with whispers as Aurora sank back into her chair, her appetite gone. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Wyatt. "I've ruined our dinner." Wyatt retook his seat, his expression gentle. "You have nothing to apologize for." He hesitated, then reached across to briefly touch her hand. "Aurora, your uncle is dangerous. I'm worried about what he might do next." "Jacob Miller is worse," she confessed quietly. "The things I've heard about how he treats women." She shuddered. "I'd rather die than marry him." "It won't come to that," Wyatt promised, his jaw set with determination. Over the next few days, Aurora settled into a routine. She worked at the general store during the day, grateful for the Peterson family's kindness. Evenings were spent at the boarding house, often with Wyatt calling to check on her welfare. Sometimes they sat on the porch with Mrs. Holloway nearby, talking about their lives. Aurora's childhood in a small town in Missouri before her family moved west, Wyatt's years working cattle drives across the territories after leaving his home in Texas. "I never meant to be a drifter," he admitted one evening as they watched the sunset. "I had dreams of my own ranch someday." "What happened?" Aurora asked. Wyatt's eyes grew distant. "War happened. Then my father died, and my mother remarried a man who made it clear I wasn't welcome. So I left, figured I'd make my own way." Aurora's heart ached for him. "And have you? Made your way?" He looked at her then, something unspoken in his gaze. "I'm starting to think so." On Saturday, for days after Aurora had fled her uncle's house, Sheriff Taylor stopped by the store with troubling news. "Your uncle's been making noise around town," he told her gravely. "He's claiming you stole money from him before you left." Aurora gasped. "That's a lie. I took nothing but what was mine." The sheriff nodded. "I believe you, but he's filed a formal complaint. Says he had a strongbox with $200 that's now missing." Mr. Peterson, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "Sheriff, Miss Reed has been nothing but honest since she started working here. I won't believe such accusations." "Nevertheless, I'll need to search your room at the boarding house," the sheriff said apologetically. just to clear this up officially. The search, conducted that afternoon with Mrs. Holloway in attendance, yielded nothing, as Aurora knew it would. But the damage to her reputation had begun. She could feel the stares when she walked down the street, hear the whispers behind fans at church on Sunday. "Don't let it trouble you," Wyatt advised as they walked back from the service, Mrs. Holloway a few paces behind. "People will forget soon enough when some new gossip comes along." "It's not just the gossip," Aurora confessed. "My uncle won't stop until he gets what he wants. He needs Miller's money too badly." Wyatt's expression darkened. "Miller's no better. I've heard how he treats the girls who work in his saloon." They walked in silence for a moment before Wyatt spoke again, his voice hesitant. "Aurora, there might be a way to solve this permanently." She looked up at him questioningly. "If you were married," he continued carefully, "your uncle would have no claim on you at all. No court would recognize his guardianship over a married woman." Aurora's heart began to race. "Are you suggesting—" "Not like that," he said quickly. "I mean, not unless—" He stopped walking, turning to face her. "What I'm trying to say, badly, is that I care for you. More than I should after so short a time. But I would never presume, Wyatt," she interrupted softly, using his given name for the first time. "Are you asking me to marry you?" His eyes held hers, vulnerable yet resolute. "I'm offering you a way out, with no obligations beyond what you'd freely choose to give. We could have a marriage in name only, if that's what you want." Before Aurora could respond, Mrs. Holloway caught up to them. "You two shouldn't linger in the street with all these gossips about," she chided gently. That night, Aurora barely slept, Wyatt's proposal turning in her mind. She hardly knew him, yet she felt more connected to him than anyone since her parents died. He was kind, honorable, and she admitted to herself she was drawn to him in ways that made her blush in the darkness. But was marriage the answer? And what kind of marriage could it be, born of necessity rather than a long courtship? Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the store. Jacob Miller himself, dressed in his finest suit, a gold watch chain draped across his substantial belly. At 50, his hair was more gray than brown, his face lined from years of late nights and hard liquor. "Miss Reed," he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I thought it time we became better acquainted, seeing as we're to be wed this coming Sunday." Aurora stiffened behind the counter. "Mr. Miller, I'm afraid you've been misinformed. I have no intention of marrying you or anyone else at present." Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your uncle assured me the matter was settled. He signed the necessary permissions. I'm 22 years old, Mr. Miller. I don't need anyone's permission to marry or refuse to marry." The saloon owner's expression hardened. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private. Your uncle mentioned certain financial difficulties you might be experiencing." "Whatever my uncle told you was a lie," Aurora said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have customers to attend to." Miller replaced his hat, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Your uncle owes me a great deal of money, Miss Reed. One way or another, I intend to collect. If not through marriage, then perhaps I'll take ownership of your uncle's house where all your parents' remaining possessions are kept." Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" "Your father's store ledgers, your mother's jewelry, the few pieces your uncle didn't sell, all still in that house. Legally, they belong to your uncle now." Miller smiled coldly. "Unless, of course, you were to become my wife. Then I might be persuaded to return them to you." After Miller left, Aurora worked mechanically through her tasks, her mind reeling. The few precious items she'd managed to save from her parents' belongings were nothing compared to what remained at the house, especially her mother's silver locket containing locks of hair from Aurora as a baby and her grandmother. The family Bible with generations of births and deaths recorded. Her father's journals. When Wyatt stopped by the store that afternoon, Aurora pulled him aside and told him about Miller's visit. "He's bluffing," Wyatt insisted. "If your uncle really put the house up as collateral for his gambling debts, Miller would have taken it already. But what if he isn't?" Aurora's voice trembled. "Those things are all I have left of my parents." Wyatt's expression grew thoughtful. "I might know a way to find out. The land office would have records of any liens against your uncle's property." That evening, Wyatt returned to the boarding house with grim news. Miller wasn't bluffing. "Your uncle signed over the deed to the house 3 days ago, with the provision that it transfers officially next Monday, the day after the wedding was supposed to take place. Aurora sank onto the porch swing, devastated. So either I marry Miller, or I lose everything that's left of my family. Wyatt sat beside her, his face resolute. There's another option. We get those items out of the house before Miller takes possession. You mean steal them? Is it stealing to reclaim what's rightfully yours? Wyatt countered. Those things belong to your parents. They should have gone to you when they died. Aurora hesitated, torn between her natural respect for the law and her desperate desire to preserve her family's legacy. How would we even get inside? Your uncle spends every evening at Miller's saloon, Wyatt pointed out. The house would be empty. It would be dangerous, Aurora whispered. Wyatt took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Aurora, I meant what I said yesterday. I care for you deeply. I want to help you, whether or not you accept my other offer. She looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity there. Slowly, she nodded. Let's do it. Tonight. Under cover of darkness, they approached the small house on the edge of town where Aurora had spent 3 miserable years. As Wyatt had predicted, it was dark and silent, her uncle undoubtedly drowning his troubles at the saloon. The back door key is kept under a loose board on the porch, Aurora whispered as they crept around to the rear of the house. Inside, they moved quietly by the light of a single lantern. Aurora led Wyatt to her uncle's bedroom, where a large trunk sat at the foot of the bed. He keeps everything valuable in there, she explained, kneeling before it. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. He must have been too drunk to remember, she murmured, lifting the lid. Inside, beneath a jumble of clothes and papers, she found what she sought: the family Bible, her mother's jewelry box, and her father's leather-bound journals. As she reached for them, her fingers brushed against something else, a small metal box. Wyatt, she whispered, pulling it out. This must be the strongbox my uncle claimed I stole. Wyatt crouched beside her, holding the lantern closer. Is the money inside? With trembling fingers, Aurora opened it. Inside lay several banknotes and a folded document. She examined the paper, her eyes widening. This is my father's will. It says the house and store were left to me, not my uncle. He was only to be my guardian until I turned 21. She looked up at Wyatt, stunned. He lied. All this time he lied. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Wyatt extinguished the lantern immediately, plunging them into darkness. Well, came Bernard Reed's slurred voice from the doorway. Looks like I caught myself some thieves. Aurora clutched the will to her chest as her uncle shuffled into the room, the moonlight through the window revealing the revolver in his hand. Uncle Bernard, she began, this house is mine. The will. Shut your mouth, he snarled. I know what the will says. Why do you think I kept it hidden? Everything your father built should have been mine from the start. I was the older brother. I deserved it. Wyatt slowly rose to his feet, positioning himself in front of Aurora. Mr. Reed, put down the gun. The law is on her side now. Bernard laughed bitterly. The law? By the time the law sorts this out, Miller will own this house, and the will won't matter anymore. He aimed the gun at Wyatt. Step aside, cowboy. My niece and I have family business to settle. Not while I breathe, Wyatt said evenly, echoing his words from their first confrontation. What happened next unfolded in a blur. Bernard lunged forward, Wyatt moved to disarm him, and the gun discharged with a deafening crack. Aurora screamed as both men fell to the floor, grappling for control of the weapon. A second shot rang out, and then silence fell. Aurora fumbled for matches, lighting the lantern with shaking hands. In its glow, she saw her uncle lying motionless, blood spreading across his shirt. Wyatt knelt beside him, pressing a hand to the wound. Is he? She whispered. He's alive, Wyatt answered grimly. But badly hurt. We need the doctor. The following hours passed in a haze of activity. The sheriff arrived, followed by the town doctor. Bernard Reed was taken to the doctor's house, where his condition remained precarious. Wyatt gave his statement, explaining how Bernard had threatened them with the gun, which had discharged during the struggle. And what were you doing in Reed's house at this hour? Sheriff Taylor asked, eyeing the items Aurora had gathered. She handed him her father's will. Reclaiming what was rightfully mine, Sheriff. By morning, word had spread throughout Redemption Springs. Aurora and Wyatt waited at the sheriff's office, uncertain of their fate. The door opened, and Sheriff Taylor entered with a man Aurora didn't recognize, a distinguished gentleman in a tailored suit. "Miss Reed, this is Judge Harmon," the sheriff introduced. "He's here for the circuit court session, and I've explained your situation." The judge studied the will carefully, then looked up at Aurora. "This appears entirely legitimate, Miss Reed. Your father left everything to you, with your uncle as trustee until your 21st birthday." He frowned. "Which was over a year ago." "Yes, Your Honor," she confirmed. "And the deed transferred to Mr. Miller?" "Fraudulent," the judge declared after examining the document. Reed had no legal right to sell property that wasn't his. He turned to the sheriff. "Taylor, once Reed is well enough, he'll face charges for fraud and attempted assault." Relief washed over Aurora. "And the house, my father's store, legally yours, Miss Reed," the judge affirmed, "as they have been since your 21st birthday." 2 days later, Aurora stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, watching as Wyatt brought in the last of her belongings from the boarding house. "It feels strange," she admitted as he joined her, "to suddenly have everything I thought was lost." Wyatt's arm brushed against hers, sending a pleasant shiver through her. "Your uncle will recover, according to the doctor. He'll face trial, but at least there's no death on anyone's conscience." Aurora nodded, grateful for that mercy despite everything her uncle had done. "Miller left town this morning. Apparently, he's decided Arizona territory no longer suits his constitution." "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it," Wyatt remarked with a smile. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Aurora gathered her courage. "Wyatt, about your proposal." He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable. "I meant every word, Aurora. But I understand if you need time, or if you've changed your mind entirely. You're a woman of means now, with options you didn't have before." Aurora reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "The only option I want is a future with you, Wyatt Evans. Not because I need protection or security, but because in the short time I've known you, you've shown me what kind of man you truly are." She smiled up at him. "And that's the kind of man I want to build a life with." Wyatt's face lit with joy as he pulled her gently into his arms. "Aurora Reed, are you accepting my proposal?" "I am," she answered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his in their first kiss, tender, sweet, and full of promise. 1 year later, Aurora stood in the doorway of the newly rebuilt Reed and Evans General Store, watching as her husband helped a customer load supplies into a wagon. The store had flourished under their joint management, becoming a cornerstone of Redemption Springs' growing prosperity. Wyatt caught her eye and smiled, excusing himself to join her. "Everything all right, Mrs. Evans?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Perfect," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year." Indeed, everything had transformed since that fateful day when Wyatt had drawn his gun and declared she wasn't anyone's property. Her uncle, after recovering from his wounds, had been sentenced to 3 years in territorial prison for fraud. The house that had once been her prison was now a warm and loving home, filled with laughter and plans for the future. But the greatest change was in Aurora herself. No longer the frightened young woman trapped by circumstance, she had found her strength and her heart alongside the man who had been willing to risk everything to stand up for her freedom. "Any regrets?" Wyatt asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Aurora turned in his arms, gazing up at the man who had become her partner in every sense. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Every step of this journey led me exactly where I was meant to be." As the Arizona sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Aurora and Wyatt Evans stood together in the doorway of their store, their shared dream made real not just of business success, but of a love born in courage and nurtured in respect, a love as vast and promising as the western frontier itself.